This is the Infrastructure Matters podcast, brought to you by the Futurum Group. We explore the latest developments in hybrid cloud computing and the technology that underpins it. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the latest trends and technologies that are shaping the hybrid cloud computing landscape. The Infrastructure Matters podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Please do not take anything reflected in this show as investment advice. Now your co-hosts, Stephen Dickens, Camberley Bates, and Krista Maycumber of the Futurum Group.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Infrastructure Matters podcast. I'm Stephen Dickens, one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined by the lovely Camberley Bates. Hey Camberley, welcome to the show.
Hey, Good Friday, I think. It's good to
Yeah,
be
so
on.
maybe based on our off camera, take a breath. You've had a busy week. Let's
I
dive
just say,
straight
oh my
in.
God.
So, I mean, I know you're still capturing your thoughts. You've literally just landed back home. Flash Memory Summit saw you from afar, rocking it on the stage, giving out awards, being your awesome self. Know there's a lot of kind of structuring of all your meetings to do, but just what were some of the big themes? You were bouncing from one bit of technology to another bit of technology. You were deep in the guts of this, straight into another meeting on a different topic. Give us a perspective of Flash Memory Summit.
Well, Flash Memory Summit, first of all, is expanded beyond just Flash, and used to be, it means, I don't know, it's been around for 20-something years. It's broadened there, so it is all about storage, data storage. It's all about NAND flash. It's all about CXL memory. It's all about, we even had a session on archive. Fred Moore, who is the tape guy, was there. So, I mean, it covered everything. And I'm on the executive committee of the conference. And so when I get there, I'm like all over the place. And so I'll give you a few really wonderful highlights that I love. Okay, so I've talked about Superwomen Flash. I know everybody is tired of that from me, but I want to highlight two people that received big awards this year. One of them is Amber Huffman, who is with Google. She was the first award winner for the Superwoman Flash Leadership Award. This year, she received the Lifetime Achievement with Flash Memory Summit. And her CV is just incredible. I knew her when she was an Intel fellow. She's was the person that drove NVMe, the consortium there. So she's a gatherer of people. She's been very involved in the OCP world. She's been very involved with the CXL. I mean, she goes back for years and years and years. So it's an incredible award that she received, and just huge standing ovation from everybody seeing that. On the heels of that, we do a Superwomen Flash Leadership Award, and that person was Amy Fowler, and she's is the VP and GM for Pure Storage. Fabulous lady, super high energy. And right now is running the work for FlashBlade, which is an incredibly, very, very successful product coming out of Pure Storage. So it was great to see that. So those are the people, so two of the big people things.
It's good to get the people right. It's good to, and I mean, you do a fantastic job of this, elevating other women in tech. I think we get so obsessed with what we do, talking about the products and the announcements, and that we bounce from event to event. I think it's always worthwhile to take a pause and a moment and go, there's people behind this technology innovation, and we've got to showcase that.
And that was the energy of the conference. So this is the second year post-COVID that we've had it. It's a smaller conference. There's about 3,500 people. It is a geek fest. Most of most of these guys are PhDs. I feel like I'm going to supercomputing when I get to these guys, because they're talking, the grunges of the technology that build the things that enable us to have phones, that enable us to have laptops, that enable us. So there's one of the cool technologies that was announced, and is this AirJet. It's a cooling system for drives, and specifically, it's a cooling system. Now, somebody said that's a fan on there, and the woman that is the CTO, she goes, no, it's not. No, it's not a fan. But anyway, it's a cooling system for very, very dense disk drive. And there's two vendors that announced the AirJet with their drives, and I believe that was Phison and Micron. That they did some big announcements, but they're for gamers, and that what the gamers have really runs hot. I didn't get to go to their breakout, but they got a big award for it, and it's probably the most talked about, cool, different technology that was on the floor. So that is one thing. All over the place was lots of announcements on PCIe 5, Gen 5. Everybody, there was just a huge cadence of announcements, and there's probably 50 announcements that come out of this conference. So that's why I'm like still reeling about what is there. But PCIe Gen 5 is the next generation, giving us lots of speed, lots of capacity, et cetera, that we're going to see out there. So that was one of the other big ones that was laid out in the world.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you've had a busy week. Always good to record on a Friday after a busy week because the brain's still spinning. But no, I mean what if you were to be looking ahead, what would be the big trends that you're seeing coming out? You talked about PCIe 5, talked about sort of cooling from a gamer-driven kind of use set. Anything else came out of your conversations? I know we're capturing you without much time to decompress, but just what was your raw take of other big themes that came out of the show?
Well, there was another big section on CXL technology for, initially that is consolidating memory and being able to use more memory lanes, et cetera, to solve some of the problem that we have with the slowdown in the processor, or not the slowdown in the processor, being able to get as much processing speed as we possibly can. So, we are to Gen 3 CXL, not Gen 3, but CXL 3.0 specification was brought out mid-year or earlier this year. But we're just getting to the point that some of the early Gen 1 is being able to be shown and shipping, and then we're going to be seeing more 2.0. So this has continued. There's a pent-up demand to see this come out, especially for the HPC processing. And so every time is kind of inching forward to getting more and more out the space. So the first place we'll see it is HPC. We'll also see it in some really big database spaces that are rolling out. And of course, the first place we're going to see some of that work is up in the cloud, because that seems to be the easier rollout path that we have. Gen AI, everybody was talking about it, was in every presentation, so everybody was tying that piece to it. Although what we do know about Gen AI right now, or ChatGPT, it's hugely processor based, a lot of processing going on it, less data. One of the things that we did see or have with our conversation is that this crowd is not yet ready to does not quite understand this concept of data platform that we've been talking about, or we're just starting to talk about what that means. Which we're going to Futurum Group will have some stuff rolling out on that space. But what they are asking the question out about is, what are the key big applications or use cases that we're going to see for Gen AI come out? Where should we be putting our investments in terms of the tuning and capabilities of the technology? And those are some of the big questions that they have. And, hopefully as an organization, the firm will be able to answer those shortly with some of the research that we're bringing out the door.
Yeah, looking forward. I mean, I get the impression that you and Krista, there's some research notes coming out next week. There's lots of coverage. I mean, still decompressing and writing, but no, sounds like really fascinating week.
Krista McComber and I hosted the track on data security and protection. Pretty much it was all about data security. Yeah, we were talking about protection, but it was all about the security. And if Total Geek Fest, if you want to get into this, we are getting down into the grunges of the firmware and the code and the design of the disk drives and what they're doing to harden these and all the different approaches. And there's lots of arguments about what's going to be the best way to get at this, but clearly you're having to do, secure the boot drive, your and all the layers above it, even before you get to the controller. So they're looking at all kinds of different ways that they're doing that, especially looking forward into how do we handle this with quantum computing? Is this enough for quantum computing? And then you have to, if you're adding more code in there in order to encrypt and keep things encrypted, whether in motion or in static, where is that being implemented, because you have an implication of cost and speed. So you're looking at all of those different approaches to how people are doing this. And I think one of the most fascinating ones that we're seeing coming out is what IBM is going to be doing with their flash core modules. And so look forward to some reporting on that once we'll put out a research note here next week on a bunch of the items that are coming out. But it's the flash core module that was, and the RPU that's in there, that's the terminology that was being used, is where they're going to be doing that, putting that in the module itself, but also being able to grab the information and update that information based upon learning across all of the flash system devices that are out in the market.
Fascinating. I mean, I think you and Krista are going to really hit it at the park with some of that analysis. I'm looking forward to reading and sort of, you guys do a great job of covering this stuff, so I'm looking forward to digging in there. So for me this week, not on the road. I've got 2 weeks worth of on the road coming. We're going to be out at VMware Explore in a couple of weeks' time. I'm off to Share, the mainframe conference, which is equally a geek fest next week. Big one for me that I'm writing about at the moment was the Enterprise Linux Association. The came out just yesterday, so I'm still sort of digging in. This is Oracle, SUSE, and Click getting together to really collaborate in the open source community. There's been a lot going on. We've had Gunnar Hellickson from Red Hat on our show. We've also had Wojciech, who's the general manager over at SUSE, talking about this. Some fascinating stuff happening in the open source community. I think we're at an inflection point. So it's going to be fascinating for me to see as I dig in. I'm kind of literally just got a bunch of tabs open on my browser, so I've got to start to do the reading this afternoon. But the initial announcement looks positive. I think always a big fan of when these communities get together and form, and it's going to be fascinating to see kind of how that evolves.
So Steve, I know you were very involved, or actually you were leading a significant effort on Linux One on the mainframe that's coming next week. How much, of the mainframe community, is there a number there that you can talk about what percentage of those mainframes are actually running Linux now versus ZOS?
I think some of the, and I'm literally had a briefing this week from IBM, and there's some numbers and some work and some research that we're talking about doing with those guys. I mean, I think Linux One is one of the fastest growing products within IBM's entire portfolio, not just systems. Has been growing upwards of 20, 30, 40% year on year since that was launched back in 2015. So Linux adoption on the mainframe, great story all around. The biggest customers, I think it'd surprise you to see that the biggest customers on the mainframe aren't ZOS customers, they're Linux customers. So that would surprise you. I think the biggest mainframe customers are also the biggest users of Linux, the fastest growing users of the mainframe.
Why
and
is that?
Well, I think it's just the combination of the two platforms together. So there's a couple of different models here. There's customers who are deploying Linux only on their mainframe under a Linux One branded box and have got no ZOS. I was at IBM and got to spend some time with a Jamaican bank, Sagicor. They did first deployment of a mainframe system in Jamaica. Basically, they've got no ZOS. They did a Unix to Linux migration onto a Linux One. So there was no ZOS in that environment. But then you've also got big organizations like Citi who've got a huge ZOS environment and then have gone and done a MongoDB consolidation where they won Partner of the Year. IBM did for this deployment at Citi of a huge MongoDB database as a service platform running on Linux on the mainframe. So you've got kind of two different modes. You've got Linux adoption happening independent of ZOS, and then you've got it as a sidecar to ZOS.
Interesting. Okay.
But I mean, the interesting one for me, going back to the Open ELA, new foundation going to dig in and see how that's structured and formatted. I think the interesting one for me was it kind of makes sense for what Suze has been doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be interesting to see what Oracle does in this space. They've got some dependencies on some of that code base that manifest themselves in Exadata and the new Oracle Cloud Compute that we covered. Um, you know, it's going to be fascinating to see. That was the other big announcement of the week. The Oracle Compute Cloud at Customer. They're calling it 3C, which is a lot easier to say than Cloud Compute at Customer. Um, really fascinating announcement from Oracle. They've had a lot of success with Exadata Cloud at Customer, connectivity between the Oracle Cloud infrastructure as a public cloud and an on-premise deployment. I wrote a Forbes article about this and collaborated with Ron Restful on some coverage on our platform, and we'll put both of those into the show notes. But fantastic connectivity. I think Oracle's very definitely becoming the fourth player in cloud, and I think they're very trusted for some of these enterprise workloads, and that ability to run big on-prem tethered cloud environments
Mm-hmm.
connected to OCI. They're less concerned about just it has to be public cloud, and I think that's going to serve them well. The other thing that was interesting in the announcement for me was they genuinely don't care from a pricing point of view whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. It's exactly the same price, and I think that level of transparency, you're not forcing an enterprise architect to make a price decision about where they put it. They can then focus on what the right characteristics for the workload. So I know we've spent a lot of time in previous episodes talking about hybrid cloud and workload placement.
Mm-hmm.
Oracle's stepping right into the sweet spot with that.
Yeah.
This compute cloud at customer.
So let me tie Flash Memory Summit to the Oracle Exadata box. Last spring, I was hosting panel over at the CXL Memory MemCon is what the conference is called, and one of the speakers there was one of the chief architects of the Exadata product. And what he presented on is a requiem for Optane, which was kind of his quasi joke but quasi serious, is because it was designed with Optane, which, if you know what Optane was, is persistent memory,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so CXL and memory is possibly that replacement over time for in Exadata, and that's
Oh,
design.
okay.
So what they're looking for. So as we, talking about the CXL progression of what's coming out there, is that we may be seeing that being part of the architecture of the Exadata box. So some of that performance is based upon persistent memory.
Yeah, I mean, Oracle does a great job. As part of the briefing this week, 60 optimizations in an Exadata, purely looking at one workload, Oracle database.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make that absolutely fly? I think they do a great job in that space. I mean, there's other ways to do it. We talked about Linux One. There's some great Oracle consolidation stories there, but I think that Exadata connected to a OCI environment
Mm-hmm.
really helps from an operational management perspective.
So one of the other
So,
things I did at the show, and I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about that with the time we have, was I hosted a panel on the Chips and Science Act of 2022. Most people know it as a CHIPS Act, but I got corrected because there's a lot of money going into science. Some of the people that were on there was Russell Harrison, who's the managing director of IEEE USA, Steve Pawlowski from Micron, Jay Tatorin from Samsung, he's government affairs, and Daniel M. Armbrust, who's co-founder and director of Silicon Catalyst. Some couple items on there. If you don't know the details on it, it's a government act that is putting about $280 billion in the next 10 years into R&D, commercialization, workforce development, and semiconductor manufacturing. And we're about a year into this. It's coming through the Department of Commerce. Fascinating piece of work. Two highlights on it I'll make. One, this is a nationwide implementation. We're seeing silicon and R&D and workforce enablement, et cetera, And very huge amount of emphasis on the group saying this is not Silicon Valley, this is not Boston, this is not Austin, this is the nation.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of looking to say how do we raise this entire nation's ability in terms of the semiconductor industry or whatever is being implemented. Secondly, it's not just manufacturing. In fact, manufacturing is about 60 billion, of the money. The rest of it has to do with R&D, workforce enablement, and some tax incentives. That's fascinating, especially when you start looking at where the investment's in. And that one of the things we reflected on is in the last year, there has been 200 billion, another 200 pledged by and going forward by many of the manufacturers, including Intel, Micron, those kind of guys that we know, plus a lot of other smaller ones in all kinds of states. And New York, where you're at, a huge amount of money going into New York, money going into Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Minnesota, yes, Colorado, but we're a tech center here. Yes, Texas, yes, but cities or states and cities that have not been necessarily known for all of this. And as we look at ourselves as this digital Gen AI, all this stuff that is exploding here, it's a nationwide gig. And I was absolutely completely fascinated by, not fascinated, but impressed about what we have done as a federal entity to enable this industry to move forward, to really jumpstart and move forward. So,
well, I'm going to give
enthusiasm.
a book a plug. If you've not read this book by Chris Miller,
okay,
I'll send you the link. But I read this on vacation recently. It gives the whole history of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
It gives the geopolitical backdrop to TSMC, the some of the underlying technology that's based out of the Netherlands, all of it, and gives you the historical context to understand. And I'm no chips guy, but I read it on vacation just to sort of gen up on this space. I think it's fascinating for me to understand what this is going to mean on a geopolitical level for us. We've obviously got the tensions with China, we've got the whole Taiwan Strait stuff going on. But I think the US has long had leadership in this space, and it needs to, in some of the spaces, re-establish that leadership. In other places, continue to put the foot to the floor and continue to be a leader.
Yeah, and there is quite a bit of tension. I mean, Biden came out this week talking about China, or with an executive order on China, despite some of the big semiconductor firms saying this is going to hurt. So as we close, their concern is as we close down their access to advanced chips, advanced technologies, China is picking up their building of legacy systems, which can have an impact on the revenues for the other industries or the other companies in the United States.
We're seeing Micron get caught in that crossfire as well with some of the stuff that's going on, which is unfortunate.
But it will work. I mean, it will work out. It will balance itself out. Is my belief system. And as I said, I'm not always a fan of what's coming out of Washington. But with this one, I'm a you go guys. You got this moving. This is really 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 good for the country.
I mean, we've had Daniel cover the CHIPS Act with Pat Gelsinger and some of the team there. I think, there's also podcasts that he's recorded with the team at Qualcomm. I think, from the Futurum Group, we've got a pretty bullish pro-US excellence and leadership type of take. I think the vendors that we have the pleasure of working with are going to innovate forward and get us to where we need to be. I think the government greasing the skids and making innovation easier and more tax efficient is just only good policy, regardless of which. This got bipartisan support. Trying to get bipartisan support for anything in Washington, it must be a good idea if it got bipartisan support.
Yeah, and I think the differences I've been reading and understanding and hearing awful lot from Gelsinger and even Micron, Qualcomm, et cetera, the big companies on the CHIPS Act, the twist that I didn't pick up on this is how much this is really pushed forward to be a nationwide effort. And it's not it is not these Intel, Qualcomm, Micron, but can we look at this as a team of USA Americans, including everybody that's immigrated into us and is, into this industry, and say, how do we take this to all parts of the country? Because if everything gets digitized, we're all computer geeks. I mean, the stuff that the kids do on computers, we wouldn't even thought about doing when we were growing up as teenagers, unless you were the geek in the back room, right?
Well, it just underpin. I mean, there's been some announcements with Qualcomm this week around a collaboration with Cadillac. I think Olivier on our team covered that. The bill of material spend in a car from a chips perspective and technology perspective has just radically shifted, and it's only going to get more the percentage that's as we look at advanced autonomous driving, as we look at infotainment systems, as we look at electric vehicles. All of these are technology and sort of innovation driven platforms these days.
So I'm wondering if that means the Geek Squad is going to get into auto maintenance.
I think on that note, Camberley, what a great way. Everybody's going to be Geek Squad. That's the wrap up. You've been listening to the Infrastructure Matters podcast, brought to you by Camberley and I today, and we look forward to you joining us on future episodes. Click and subscribe, do all the things to help the algorithm, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.